Happy Sabbath, everyone, and thanks, Dwight, for that study. Let's open this study with just a quick word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we invite your Spirit again to guide and direct in our study and to help us to understand the characters that we need in these last days. May your Holy Spirit continue to work upon our hearts in developing a Christ-like character. May we see and behold Christ, and may we value the things of heaven rather than the things of earth. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, happy Sabbath again. And in this introduction to the book of Revelation, we're just skimming through some things. Last week, we looked at the unsealing of the seven seals. We noted that the first six seals are in Revelation 6, and the seventh seal is Revelation 8, verse 1. Which really should be the last verse of Revelation 7. So technically that verse should have been Revelation 7:18, but it's not. Instead it's Revelation 8:1. So I kind of find that interesting. 7:18, of course, representing July 18. Now, Revelation 7 is the topic of study today. And if anybody's read Haskell's book, the Seer of Patmos, he addresses Revelation 7 with the characteristics of the various tribes. And he does discuss, as many people do, why the list of these tribes is what it is. But we're going to go through and read this, and then we'll discuss some of these things. Now, we know in chapter 6, in the last verse there, which is verse 17, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? That's going to be answered in Revelation 7, right? So in answer to that question, is John sees this vision here, right? And after these things, I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till thou hast sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. So when we have these angels ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, what are these angels representative of? These four angels, or not the four angels, but the four angels are going to have this loud voice. He cries a loud voice to the four angels. So let me see here. So we see four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, right? Then you see another angel ascending from the east, that's the sealing angel, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. So you have four angels holding the four corners of the earth, holding back these winds, right? And then you have another angel, which has this loud voice and the seal of the living God, saying to those angels to hold back the four winds. So what's being represented here symbolically? You had a comment there, William?
Well, the seven last plagues.
Okay, so the seven last plagues
are about to be let loose, that God's people are unsealed. So four angels represents the four corners of the earth, so worldwide. We also have four angels here mentioned in chapter 9 that are loosed, but here they are. These angels are holding. There's a connection there, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So there's these angels holding back winds. Now, angels are what in this context? What are these angels? Like, how can they hold back winds? They're obviously symbolic. So what are they?
Well, they not represent messages or...
I was going to say Revelation 14. Excuse me. It could be wrong.
Well, in Revelation 14, we're going to have the 144,000. And that's going to be the proclamation of the three angels' messages. Now, we know that, of course, in the first 12 chapters of, or the first 11 chapters of of Revelation, we're going to be addressing these churches, seals, and trumpets, right? And then in the last 11 chapters, we're going to be addressing these beasts. But some of the imagery and the ideas that are in the first 11 chapters show up in the latter chapters. One example is, of course, the 144,000 being mentioned in chapter 7 and chapter 14. So there is definitely a connection between chapter 7 and chapter 14. Now, chapter 14 is going to address the 144,000 and the proclamation of the first, second, and third angels' message, right? Messages. So if we're going to say that they're messages, we have to kind of figure out exactly when we are. Now, so remember in chapter 6, we're going to have all of these seals being unsealed, right? And then the last seal that's unsealed in chapter 6 is the sixth seal. And we're saying that that's October 22nd, 1844. Even though it has all of the imagery of the second coming, in its place and where it occurs, it's because Christ does not come back in that history, but Christ could have come back in that history, right?
Or he typifies him coming back. Certainly in 1844.
Yeah, definitely typifies him coming back. And that is, Christ could have come back in that history if God's people had been faithful, right? You know, if they hadn't made all the mistakes that they made in regard to their characters. If, you know, for instance, if the Millerite movement had accepted the seventh-day Sabbath and, you know, the Sunday law and all those things could have happened in that history. I mean, ifs are, you know, big things, right? Like the what ifs. You know, what if this had happened? But the thing is, it could have happened. The failure wasn't God. The failure is God's people in this history. Now, of course, God foresees that, but He sets up everything so that they could succeed if they had been faithful. Okay, so obviously Jesus doesn't come back in that history, but there is a question about who's able to stand. So that means there needs to be a characteristic of God's people in order for the end to occur. So chapter 7, again, it's parenthetical chapter within the seals. And then when we get to chapter 8, verse 1, we see that this seventh seal opened brings us to the Day of Atonement. So that silence in heaven for about the space of half an hour, we understand, not Adventists in general, but this group, basically me and anybody who agrees with me in this group, takes the position that refers to the work of the high priest on the Day of Atonement, entering into the most holy place. That's where we would put that space of half an hour. So we don't put that half an hour into, you know, when heaven is empty for, you know, the time that it takes for Jesus to come to the earth, you know, those types of things. They were a week ascending to the sea of glass. It says some people just try to take that about a space of half an hour, that's about a week, and they match that week up. But we actually say that this is referring to the Day of Atonement. So that silence, the seventh seal, which is open in our history, I guess you could say, the proclamation of the sixth seal, that's opened up in Millerite history, and this refers to our history, our time. So we're in the time in which the seventh seal is opened. Okay. So the answer to this question, who shall be able to stand, is referring to the time in which the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary occurs, which is concurrent with the transformation of the character of God's people on earth. That is, God has to have a people, 144,000, who represent his character on the earth. So what the critics within Adventism call last generation theology, that is a disparaging term. It's an epithet, the LGT, right? Last generation theology meant to be an insult, that this is some kind of error, some kind of fanaticism or whatever, whatever they think it is. But this is Adventism, as far as we understand it. This is the whole purpose of Adventism, the great controversy, is that God is going to have a people that are going to live in the sight of a holy God without a mediator. during the time of the 7 last plagues. So we can see then what Stephen said about the 7 last plagues. Those are the things that are going to come up upon the earth. Now, how did the Adventists understand the 7 last plagues in the context of the second coming of Christ in 1844? What did they ascribe? What things did they connect together with the 7 last plagues? Does anybody know?
Didn't they ascribe this also to the passing of the Sunday law?
I'm talking about the Adventists, the Millerite Adventists.
Okay.
So they were looking for the 7 last
Christ.
plagues, but the 7 last plagues in connect before the return of Christ, right?
Right.
And what did they connect that to? Was it connected to the angering of the nations?
I think that was logical.
Yeah. So they had this idea that the 7 last plagues were connected to the angering of the nations. Now, what about August 11th, 1844? Did they connect that to the angering of the nations? I know we went through this in the past, but that was quite a while ago now. So initially, they believed that probation would close on August 11th, 1840, and that the next thing would be the 7 last plagues. And they connected that to the angering of the nations. So there was this idea that before Jesus came back, the 7 last plagues had to occur. Now, the 7 last plagues did not occur before, and in their 7th month movement, when they had Jesus coming back, they just kind of set aside the 7 last plagues, right?
Why do you think they didn't recognize it, or did they?
Recognize what?
That the 7 last plagues didn't occur?
Well, they recognized it didn't occur because they could see that the plagues hadn't occurred. But initially, they believed that the 7 last plagues would occur. Like, basically, our understanding of end time events is very similar to the Millerites, except they didn't have a Sunday law, right? They didn't have the Sunday law issue, but they had a close of probation followed by the 7 last plagues. They taught that, right? The close of probation was not something invented by Seventh-day Adventists. It was understood by many Christians in the past, even the investigative judgment. They used different terms for it. But the idea that probation would close prior to the second coming of Christ and that the plagues would fall out after the close of probation isn't unique to Seventh-day Adventists. The Millerites understood that, and many other Christians prior to the Millerites understood that. Right? It wasn't really popular in the time of the Millerites, but in centuries before, many Protestants believe that. Right? So they understood there was some connection. Those who were studying Bible prophecy understood that there was this thing called the 7 last plagues that preceded the second coming of Christ, and that the 7 last plagues were preceded by a close of probation. Okay, so the Millerites had this close of probation, but they never saw the 7 last plagues, yet they still believed that Jesus was going to come back in October in 1844 without the plagues. And so it seems kind of peculiar that they would set that aside at that point. But have we done the same thing in our movement? Did we make predictions failing to take into account things that had to happen prior to those events? Because we went through this, we see that we made some of the same mistakes that the Millerites made. And those are still being made. People are expecting a Sunday law without the things that need to precede a Sunday law occurring, right? So the next thing that we expect is not a Sunday law. In our lines, what do we understand has to happen next? What waymark has to arrive? What waymarks have to arrive before the Sunday law?
Midnight.
Midnight. So midnight, and then the midnight cry, and then the Sunday law, right? And even that, the midnight cry, and the Sunday law are a fractal within our lines, because the Sunday law is midnight in the bigger line. That is the line Jeff had in 2016 with the first day of the first month, the 5th day of the 4th month, the first day of the 5th month, and the 10th day of the 7th month from Millerite history lining up with 9/11, midnight cry, and the Sunday law. We can see that midnight has not arrived yet. And that line would have midnight being some event in our history. If we're going to zoom in, if the Sunday law is the close of probation, October 22nd, 1844. So that's how Jeff looked at it. But if we look at it and zoom out, we can see that close of probation on that line, that the close of probation parallels October 22nd, 1844, where Ellen White has the loud cry paralleling the midnight cry, right? Because Ellen White clearly says that the midnight cry is a parallel to the loud cry, correct? That's unequivocally stated in the Spirit of Prophecy.
Agreed.
Yeah. So that means if we're going to look at the midnight cry in Millerite history, that's going to be parallel to the loud cry. And that means that you need a Sunday law. The Sunday law precedes the loud cry, the Sunday law in America, the first Sunday law. So that Sunday law at least has to be marked as midnight or the midnight cry. And we sort of have these two waymarks, midnight and the midnight cry, but we can see that the midnight cry is really the loud cry. So that means midnight would be the Sunday law. So when the Sunday law happens in the United States, that's going to be midnight, right? On that bigger line. But we are still in a zoomed in line. So we have midnight, that is, we have the Sunday law on our line, which would be midnight on the line above it. I know it's a little bit confusing, but if you could picture it, I could show you some diagrams, but we can look at that in more detail in some other place. But the point is that we have these events that have to occur. So the sealing of the 144,000, to get back to this, it has to happen before what time? When are the 144,000 sealed? So we have this time from October 22nd, 1844, right, when we have to have this sealing occur. That's going to occur during the Day of Atonement, right?
To occur before probation closes, right?
Yeah, it has to occur before probation closes, right? Now, is the sealing have to occur before the Sunday law, or does the sealing occur in connection with the Sunday? That is the Sunday law part of the sealing, or does the sealing have to happen before the Sunday law? Because we've gone through this before, but just
Sunday law is a testing time.
Okay, I can't hear you too well, Jeff. You're kind
Sunday
of quiet.
law is a testing time.
Okay, so the Sunday law is a test. Now, so those who pass the Sunday law test receive the seal of God. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I would believe so.
Yeah, I would think that's the case. That to receive that seal, obviously there's a character that's needed, but that seal is needed to go through the time of the 7 last plagues, particularly the time of Jacob's trouble, right? So you have a preparation that's needed, a test that occurs, and after that test, we have this loud cry, this proclamation of this message and power. Then probation closes because everyone's made their choice. And then we have the 7 last plagues. Okay? So this angel, the sealing angel, so this other angel is ascending from the east. What is this other angel in Revelation 7:2? You got another angel.
You say 17 or 7?
Revelation 7:2, we
Okay.
have this, says, I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. So what is this angel? Because an angel represents a message, right?
Correct.
So is this the third angel's message? Is this the second angel's message?
Or is it the
Some
repeat
other.
of the second angel's message?
Okay, so the question is it a repeat of the second angel? Because that's what I would mean if it's the second angel. Is it a repeat of the second angel?
That's the way
Is
I
that the
look
one?
at it.
Or is it just the third angel? It's not introduced yet. We don't have the third angels introduced, but this is a sealing angel, right? It's the one with the seal of the living God. So it could be the third angel's message, but it has the term another angel, which in Revelation 18, we have that phrase as well. So in Revelation 18, I saw another angel come down from heaven. But this one is different in that it has great power and the earth is lightened with his glory, right? And he's going to call them out of Babylon. So I would take the position probably that this angel is the third angel's message being shown in this history, because that's going to be the sealing message. Any comments on that?
Great power, so that would, you know, great
Okay,
power.
yeah. So, but when it comes to the sealing, it says, said the angel, the third angel is binding or sealing them in bundles for the heavenly gardener, right? So we can connect the third angel with the sealing message. So I know there's that statement. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I would do, is I would say that the third angel is the one that has the seal of the living God. But because it is a message, and the third angel's message is proclaimed in that history, right? That the third angel arrives October 22nd, 1844. So that's what happens at the end of the sixth seal, is we have the arrival of the third angel's message.
No, this is might be, but is July 18th also a sealing angel?
Okay, well, so it depends what line you're in, right? So July 18th, in the bigger scheme of things, is it a waymark on the line? Like, it's definitely not on Ellen White's line, right? But if we go to the line back in 2016, where we have a line that the first angel arrives, you know, Jeff had the first angel arriving at 9/11, which was really Ellen White's line, 9/11. But the point is, we have, or not the second angel arriving, pardon me, at 9/11. So then you're going to have midnight cry, and the Sunday law, right? That's how Jeff had the line in 2016. Fifth day of the fourth month being midnight, first day of the fifth month being the midnight cry, and the 10th day of the seventh month being the Sunday law. But we know that that's actually zooming into a line, that's a fractal. The biggest line that we zoom out into within our history, we can see July 18th is not on that line at all, right? So in the line where we have midnight being the Sunday law, and the midnight cry paralleling the loud cry, and the close of probation for the world paralleling October 22nd, 1844, there is no July 18, 2020. Does that make sense? Because people always keep asking me these questions about these different waymarks. And I always ask them, what line are you talking about? Because
I don't
we
know
don't
which
see.
line I'm talking about. I just thought that you said it that the third angel message was October the 22nd, right? And it
Yeah,
and July
that's when
18th.
it arrives, October 22nd, 1844, and it's continued. It doesn't arrive again in our history.
Right. Well,
Right?
I'm just saying,
Like on the big line, because we're in the time of the third angel's message. We're looking at this zoomed out line right now, right? We're looking at, in this line, we're looking at, there's the sealing message. We have Millerite history dealing with the sixth seal, right? When that sixth seal closes, we're going to have the seventh seal opened, right? Which is going to be the Day of Atonement. But prior to the end of that sixth seal, or at the end of the sixth seal, the question is asked, who shall be able to stand? And then we're going to see that in that history, there is a message that goes forward, which is the sealing message, which we believe is the third angel's message. And that the angel who has that seal is going to say, hold the four angels, hold the winds, right? That is, we have this time of, within that time of the Day of Atonement, this work that has to be accomplished. We have these people that have to develop this character. So the people, the servants of God, have to be sealed on their foreheads. And so we do believe that the Sunday law is connected to that. We are in the time in which the Sabbath and Sunday become this issue. Now, it comes a point where the Sunday law occurs. We haven't got to that point yet. We're approaching the Sunday law. That's going to be a test. But God has to have a people that are going to be sealed. And the question is the Sunday law what seals them? That is, when people make their choice for the Sabbath over the Sunday, is that how they received the seal of God? I guess is the question. Would we say that that's how they received the seal? Or some people think that they need to have the seal before the Sunday law. But if it's a test, wouldn't, the seal be like, when you get a diploma, you graduate and you have your diploma and they put the seal on there? I have a diploma over here with the seal on it. So doesn't that make sense that the seal is given when you pass the Sunday law test? Any thoughts on that? Okay, so I assume you all agree with me. Now we have the number of them which were sealed. So we have, and this is what I primarily wanted to look into. So we have these different tribes. There's 144,000 that are sealed. And we believe that that's a literal number. That is, God needs to have a number that he has specified to answer forever the question, is Christ's sacrifice for sin efficacious? That is it going to accomplish the work that needs to be accomplished? So he has set up this number. 144,000 are going to have to stand during the 7 last plagues and not sin, right? They're going to stand in the sight of a holy God without a mediator. Now, it's going to list these different tribes. Now, when we look at the tribes in Genesis, so Genesis chapter 49, Jacob's going to bless his sons. And you're going to have these sons listed, starting with Reuben, right? So you're going to have Reuben, Simeon, Levi. So yeah, we have Reuben. Let me say, I had this list here. I guess I can just read it from the scriptures, but okay. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah is next. And then we have Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph. Okay. That's 12, I think. I think I got them all. Now, are those the tribes that are going to inherit the land of Israel? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. I forgot Benjamin. Are those the tribes that inherit the land of Israel? So when we talk about the 12 tribes, or we talk about the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, is that the same?
You have Ephraim and Manasseh as well.
Okay, right. So we know that there's originally the 12 sons, and they're all going to receive these blessings. But in chapter 48, you're also going to have Joseph's sons blessed by Jacob, right? Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, why is Joseph having his 2 sons blessed? What is Jacob doing? What is it that Joseph receives from Jacob when his 2 sons are blessed?
A double blessing?
Yeah, so he's receiving the double portion, right? Because there's the birthright of the firstborn. So the birthright of the firstborn, there's 3 things: the priesthood, the kingship, and the double portion. But Joseph is going to receive the double portion by having both his sons becoming tribes, right? And
yes.
And Ephraim sometimes referred to as Joseph, right? So Joseph, his son Ephraim, of course, is going to get the larger of the inheritance in the land. But that's what's happening here. So Jacob, in blessing Manasseh and Ephraim, is giving the double portion to Joseph. And then when he blesses his 12 sons, he's going to give the priesthood to Levi and the kingship to Judah. But with Joseph, he gets the double portion, right, of land. So that's why he says, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him, right? So,
but does he give Levi the priesthood then, or is that not?
Yeah, so well, it's going to be later, but what's hinted at with Levi is it says regarding Levi. Let me see if I can find Levi here.
It mentions, yeah, he'll have no portion or something.
Yeah, so he shall not. Let me see. I just got to find it. Reuben.
Well, there's
Levi.
one chapter 7 leaves out Dan, don't it?
Yeah, but let's get there when we get there.
Okay.
Yeah. So I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Both Simeon and Levi are divided in Jacob and scattered in Israel, but in different ways, right? Now, how is
Yeah.
Levi scattered in Israel and divided?
Well, they're given the refuge cities.
So they're given the cities of refuge, the Levitical cities within the different tribes. And what about Simeon? What happens to the tribe of Simeon? It's not always as clear cut as people make it out, the 10 tribes and the 12 tribes and the 2 tribes. Because Simeon's going to have territory. It kind of gets taken over by Judah, doesn't it, over time? Right, because they have their initial division of their properties, their lot in the land of Israel. But it changes over time. And Simeon gets subsumed by Judah. We don't have time to go into that in detail, but that's what happens with Simeon. It ends up in the area of Judah and just kind of gets taken over. So when we talk about the northern 10 tribes, is there actually northern 10 tribes?
Not no more. They've been scattered, ain't they?
No, but I mean in the time when they're scattered. It's in the time of Israel, when we talk about northern Israel. Is there actually 10 tribes in the north?
No.
No, there isn't. Right? But we often talk that way because, the Jews talk that way. Because of how the land was originally divided, they had the northern 10 tribes, but really there isn't northern 10 tribes. And so it is rather confusing. It's not as straightforward as people think. Now, when we go to Revelation chapter 7, and we have this list of these tribes, one of the things that we see is that if you just listed Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin as the tribes, you would see that that's the ones in Revelation 7. The Dan is not there, right? And if you compared it with the list that we have in the list in Genesis 49, that's just the simple way you look at it. You look at the list in Genesis 49, right? It has Dan, and you look at the list in Revelation 7, and it doesn't have Dan, and instead it has Manasseh. And so superficially, people make an argument that, so just here, took away the number so you can see it better. So if you go through this, you're going to see Judah's listed first instead of Reuben, but it's basically the same list. Judah, Reuben, they put Gad here earlier, right? Asher, Naphtali, then you have Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, so they put later in the list, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. And so if you just line these up with Genesis 49, the only difference is you'd have Manasseh instead of Dan, right? So what people say is, well, Dan is taken out and Manasseh replaces him. Is that the case? Is that how we would look at it? Because when we're dealing with the 12 sons, are we dealing with the 12 tribes? So one thing we can say here is this is not the list of the literal tribes of Judah as they existed. It's not the list of the 12 sons, right? So Genesis 49 is a list of the 12 sons, but not the 12 tribes, because we know that Joseph gets the double portion and Levi doesn't get a portion. So if we're going to compare these two lists, we can see that Dan isn't there, but who replaces Dan in this list?
Levi.
Levi's replacing Dan, right? Now, and Dan is not there. Now, I did some studying on this before this study. So what generally Adventist scholars say, that the books and stuff that you find in Adventism, is they say Dan isn't there because of his idolatry and apostasy. Is idolatry and apostasy unique to the tribe of Dan?
Definitely not.
No, so I don't really understand that argument. But the characteristics of Dan, that he's a backbiter, right? He's like a serpent, in the way, right? Is a characteristic, and it has to do with his deceit, that there's guile in his mouth, false accusations. Do the 144,000 have guile in their mouths?
Nope.
No. So that means that characteristic would automatically exclude you from being one of the 144,000, right? The gossip and the rumors, the backbiting, the deceit, all of those things would exclude you. That's why Dan is excluded. It is a characteristic that God abhors, right? Now Levi replacing Dan, what is the characteristic of Levi? Now, obviously, in the blessing, Levi and Simeon are cruel, but what is it that caused Levi to become the tribe that is going to be the priests? What characteristic?
So they're fearful when the golden calf.
Right. At the time of the golden calf, when the golden calves are being worshipped, the tribes of Levi does not participate in the worship of the golden golden calf, right? There's one. So Levi is given the priesthood at that time. And so there's this unfolding of history. There's the original 12 sons of Jacob and the 2 sons of Joseph. There's the blessings that they have. There is, they go into captivity in Egypt. When they come out of captivity in Egypt, God's going to give them his law. He's going to make a covenant with them. But they're going to break the covenant. All that the Lord has said we will do and be obedient. And then when they break that covenant, God sets up this whole system of sacrifices. We've looked into that in our other studies. So Levi ends up replacing the firstborn. That is the firstborn. They have to redeem it. That's in Numbers chapter 3. So normally the firstborn would be, the priest of the family, but now the Levites are going to take over this priesthood with this new sanctuary, the Levitical priesthood. And so the characteristic of Levi is essential as part of a character of the 144,000. Now, Stephen Haskell, as I mentioned earlier in his book, The Seer of Patmos, addresses the characteristics of these tribes, and other people do as well. So if we're going to look at the characteristics of these tribes, I have a list here. Where's this list? Okay, I have a lot of stuff here. Okay, there's the list. So if we look at Judah, right? So Judah has a characteristic of leadership, right? And it demonstrates dominion over self, so self-control. Reuben, who is unstable as water, has to overcome his instability, his passion, and his fleshly lusts, right? So he must be unwavering and sexually pure. So that's a characteristic that Reuben has to have. Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last, to be spiritual warriors who endure the time of trouble. Asher, his food shall be rich, blessings of abundance, to embody the health message or temperance. Naphtali. So these are just suggestions, right? We can see characteristics. Swift as a deer, to be swift in spiritual action and to proclaim the loud cry with purity, power, and effectiveness. Manasseh, God has made me forget all my toil, to fully experience the blotting out of sins and to be free from all guilt and past regrets. So when we look at these characteristics, I don't think that there is you're going to be one of the 12 tribes in that sense, that you're going to have just that characteristic. I believe that these characteristics are universal for all of the 144,000. That is, all of these characteristics are needed in order that their characteristics, that is, these 12 tribes are given to symbolize the character that the 144,000 have. Now, it says there's 12,000 from each tribe. So some people just take this literally in that sense. Now we know that there's 144,000, that there's a literal number, but it's also a symbolic number. And can we say that there's literal tribes, but they're also symbolic, right? So they have these names of these tribes, but they're symbolic of character that all of the 144,000 have to have.
So if,
yeah.
I'm just thinking, you're going back to what you're saying about Dan being a backbiter. So
Yeah.
his name also means judge. So could it be like the 144,000 are no longer subject to judgment because they've in a sense been sealed? So
Well,
there's no other.
But I think the thing about when I think about Dan is his name being a judge is that's more the characteristic of backbiting, right? I associate those two together. It's more that he judges, not that he's judged, right? If that makes sense. Because when we judge other people and their characters and don't look at our own characters, that's a characteristic of Dan. To find the fault with others instead of seeing your own.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, but the 144,000, in a sense, are not going to meet any, nor going to be subject to the 7 last plagues. So that
Right.
executive judgments, therefore, Dan isn't there amongst them.
Yeah, that could be too. That could be too. You could probably have it both ways. Because they don't judge, they're not going to be judged. If that makes sense in that sense of judging. So we could look at these different characteristics that God. That is what I'm trying to say is that the blessing that God gives to Jacob, or that Jacob gives to his sons, the blessing of God that Jacob gives to his sons. That blessing is something all of us need. That is, we need to recognize that God is blessing us, even in the things that are our character defects, or I should say, especially in the things that we have to overcome in our characters, that we receive God's blessing. So when you think about it as a person growing up, what is it that a child needs from his father and from his parents in general? What is it that he most needs to become a full-grown person? What is it we need?
Well, they need to be corrected.
Well, yeah, but don't we need to be loved?
Yeah, they need to be loved.
Well,
They need
of
to be-
course.
Yeah. So that's the thing we need the most of all. Now love, of course, is a 4-letter word nowadays, right? It doesn't mean what it used to mean. So when we think about a parent's love, that includes correction, right? It includes guidance. It includes a blessing where you feel accepted, right? Where you have purpose, right? When a person doesn't receive that, a person is damaged. A person that is rejected and criticized and trampled upon and abused in various ways, is controlled, is never allowed freedom to make choices and to learn. That person is damaged, right? And that is us, right? We're all damaged because of sin. We didn't have perfect parents, but we do need that blessing, and God provides that blessing. He provides that transformation of character, that encouragement, that love that lifts us up above this world and brings us into his kingdom. And the 144,000 demonstrate this perfect work of God in transforming humanity. That these characters that we see, when we look at the reason why I became a Christian primarily was when I read the Bible, I didn't find perfect people in it. I found a perfect God, but imperfect people just like me, that God was wanting to transform, that it shows humanity with its warts and all. It doesn't whitewash humanity. It shows us that we're sinners. Other religions don't do that. They try to basically exalt human nature, your own desires. They try to use your pride, your They're not meant to bring you into a true humility that brings about a transformation of character. And the Bible does that. Right? So we see that these characters, Joseph's brothers, the story of Joseph and his brothers is a story about a transformation of characters, right? His brothers are transformed. They sell Joseph into slavery and they regret it and they're changed. And Joseph tests their characters. And God is doing that to us all the time. Now, we also see in this chapter that there's a great multitude from every nation, right? So it says, after this I beheld and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and peoples and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, right? Now, some people, some Adventists argue, well, first he sees the 144,000, but then, this is the same group, all of these people, because the idea is that the 144,000 represents all the redeemed. It's not a separate, the final generation for some Adventists. But we can see that this great multitude represents all the redeemed. It's distinct from the 144,000. Right? And it says, one of the elders answered, saying unto me, what are these which are arrayed in white robes, and whence came they? Right? And so there's disagreement regarding this passage on who is being referred to and what this answer is. It says, Sir, thou knowest. And he said to me, these are they which came out of great tribulation, and have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth on the throne shall dwell among them. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them unto fountains of living fountains of waters, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. So there are some people who say that this is referring to the 144,000, separate from the great multitude, and some who argue that this is all the redeemed have this characteristic. Because some people say, well, but this is referring to the 7 last plagues. They must have gone through the 7 last plagues. So I'm not going to go into that discussion. There are different views on how to interpret this. And then I'm just going through this quickly because I want to finish this off. In Revelation 14, of course, we have the 144,000 again, right? So it has their characteristics. And we will look at that in more detail when we get to that chapter again in the 3 angels' messages. But it's pretty clear that the 144,000 are a distinct group from the great multitude. So next week, we're going to look at the 7 trumpets. So again, this is just an introduction to the book of Revelation. There's lots to study there in Revelation chapter 7. And just because we went through it doesn't mean everything that I said is 100% correct. There may be things that need to be corrected. But we can see that for a starting point to look at the 144,000, we have, there's differences of opinion regarding the tribes and who's replacing them. But I would think that the one that replaces Dan is Levi, where most books will say it's Manasseh that replaces Dan. And Joseph is just another name for Ephraim. So you got Ephraim and Manasseh as part of those tribes. Okay, any final thoughts on chapter 7 before we close with prayer? I'm sure there's things that I missed and things that I could have discussed, but I think that covers the basic structure. Okay, well, let's close with prayer. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, thank you again for the time that we've had to study on the Sabbath. And I just pray that your Spirit can rest upon each person, that you can be with us in our thoughts, in our study, in our fellowship. We ask, Lord, that you can bring us together again to study these things, and that in our personal study of Revelation, that we can have insights that draw us close to you. May your angels watch over our family and friends, and may you give us strength for the trials in this week ahead. And we pray this and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.